Hey guys, Jen here, the Feel Good Life Coach. How are you today? How is your week going? Welcome to my two-part training series. So this training series is all about how to create a new relationship story for yourself, and it's happening in two parts. So today we're doing how to change your relationship story, and tomorrow we're talking about the Man-ifest Method, which is my signature method for manifesting love. Okay, so to start out, I wanted to sort of go over what an actual story is and why you would want to change it. So a story, a relationship story, and this is true of any kind of story that you might have about yourself. So this internal story, right? This is not like a fictional story or something like that. We're talking about internal stories, right? So things that we've made up about ourselves, things that we've decided are true about ourselves, and then we've been telling that story our whole lives. So what is a story? It's really just a collection of beliefs, limiting ways of thinking, behaviors, patterned behaviors or patterned ways of thinking or habitual behaviors and things like that about a certain area of your life. So we all have a relationship story, we have a money story, we have a success story, we have a health story, we have a internal self-worth story. Like we all have different stories about ourselves and about our lives and the different areas of our lives. And each area is going to be different. You're going to have a different story for these different areas. So today we're talking about relationship stories and what your story is on that. So the story meaning your patterns, your habitual behavior, your habitual way of thinking, your limiting beliefs that you have in this area, or anything else that gets in the way of you having what it is you desire to have. Now you can also have a relationship story within a relationship, right? So you might not be single right now. You may be in a relationship and you have a story about that relationship. And maybe there's something within that you want to shift. This will work for that as well. But I am obviously mostly talking to people who are in between relationships and are sort of in a place where they want a new relationship, but they don't want it to be like all the ones they've had in the past, right? So maybe they've been dating for a while or they've been in and out of different relationships and just feeling like, you know what? I'm not really getting what I truly want. And the reason is because of all the stuff we're going to talk about today and in tomorrow's training as well. So that's what a relationship story is. And like I said, you have a story about a lot of different areas in your life, not just relationships, but today we're talking about your relationship story. Okay, why would you want to change this story? Now, obviously, if you have a story about relationships and love in your life that serves you, great, you don't need to change it. But my guess is you're watching this right now because you don't and you want to. So let me just kind of back up a little bit and share a little bit about my journey and my story, because I think this will sort of give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. So my story in relationships and in love for my entire life was that I don't get to have the guy I actually want. So every time I would meet a guy that I really liked or I had a crush on somebody, they would either not like me back or they would like me back, but it would only be temporary. And then they would leave, ditch me for somebody else. And then I would go, okay, well, I guess I'm not worthy or deserving of, having the kind of guy I want. And so instead, I'm going to just do what's safe. And I'm going to date a guy friend that I have who likes me, like a guy I'm friends with who I know likes me. And that was what I did, right? That was my habitual patterned way of being in relationships and in the area of love and romance in my life. So I was always not really getting what I wanted. And a lot of this came down to the fact that I just didn't feel worthy of it, right? So it's really looking at what has your story been up until this point. And this is something you have to do in hindsight a lot of times. So, you may not realize that this is what's been going on. For me, it took my divorce going down last year. Oh my God, it's almost been 2 years now. In 2019, it took my divorce going down for me to finally get really clear on what my relationship patterns and stories had been up until that point. And of course, knowing that I didn't want to continue them, that I wanted to create a new story for myself so that I could have what I actually wanted in a relationship and in another person. But the problem is if you don't change your inner stories around relationships, around love, around whatever, situations you have, you're going to keep just getting more of the same. So it's really looking at what has your story been up until this point in the area of relationships or in the area of love, romance, etc. So look at things like what patterns have you had. So it's really easy to see patterns when you look back at previous things. So like in hindsight, and you can look at, okay, what happened in that relationship? Like, how did it end? How did it start? Like, what were the different things going on during that time? And just really look at the patterns. So for me, when I looked back, my pattern went something like this. meet a guy who I like, I have a crush on him, or, I just really like him. And then either guy likes me and we date for a little while and then he ditches me for someone else, or he doesn't like me at all. And it's basically a one-sided thing. And then the next thing in the pattern is date one of my friends. And then when we break up, the pattern starts all over again, right? So that's exactly how my pattern went for my entire life, starting at a really, really young age. So I think this started when I was like 10 years old. I had a crush on this guy in my 5th grade class. He didn't like me. I somehow, as a 10-year-old, made that mean I wasn't good enough or I was unworthy of having what I wanted. And I took that in subconsciously and literally lived that story and that pattern for my entire adult life. So over and over again, that was my experience. So what have your patterns been in your previous relationships, in your previous dating situations? Like, what have the same things shown up over and over again? And you can kind of look back at this to figure it out. And also look at what limiting beliefs do you have, what limiting ways of being do you have, like what stories have you been telling yourself about certain things. So one of my limiting beliefs, when I got divorced and started to really dig into all this stuff, I discovered one of my limiting beliefs is that I didn't think I could have the kind of guy I wanted if I lived in the city that I live in right now. So I had to deal with that, right? Because that's a limiting belief that's pretty nonsense, right? Because why would you ever want to have a belief or a story that says the kind of guy you want doesn't live where you live, right? So then you're just always going to be having mismatches, having misalignments, and you're not really going to get what you want because you have this belief that's going to stop you from getting it. So what patterns do you have? What limiting beliefs do you have? What previous relationship baggage do you have? So this is also really key because if you don't deal with your previous relationship baggage, you end up bringing that shit into all your new relationships. And so that's how you end up attracting the same kind of person or the same kind of situation. So one example here would be, let's say someone cheated on them in their previous relationship. So now they believe that all guys cheat or all women cheat or, people can't be trusted. And so what happens is they bring that baggage into every relationship they have. So even if they're with a person who isn't that way, who wouldn't do that to them, they're going to start to notice certain things that wouldn't normally trigger anybody, but they get triggered by it. So one example for me, and not that my ex-husband ever cheated on me that I knew of because I never found out if he did, but I never thought he did either. But he did used to have this habit of he would take his phone and he would always move into another room or he would stand away so I couldn't see the screen and he would always be sending text messages and all this stuff. And so even though he probably wasn't doing anything, because I had previous situations where that meant something, right? It meant that was what was going on. That is getting projected on him. Now, this same situation was happening very early on in the new relationship that I'm in right now. So my boyfriend has this habit of putting his phone face down on the table when he isn't using it. And of course, that triggered me to think oh, what's he hiding, right? What's he trying to hide? Because of previous baggage. And so you have to deal with that shit. So as soon as I started to recognize that in my new relationship, I was like, okay, got to deal with that because I know my boyfriend isn't doing anything. I know that I can fully trust him and I absolutely know that I have nothing to worry about. It's just how he always has done it, right? He just always does that with his phone. It's not like it means anything. But because of previous baggage, I made that mean something. And so I had to get rid of that, right? Derail it, deactivate it so that it was no longer coming up for me. So now it's not a trigger anymore. So now when I see him texting somebody or doing something, I'm not worried about what is he doing, right? Because I no longer have that trigger from my previous situations and from the previous things that happened. So same thing in your life, you want to look at where do I still have previous baggage from other situations that I've been in, whether it's a relationship or just dating somebody or anything else that's happened to you, right? What baggage do you still have that you need to deal with? And this is not a bad thing, right? Everybody has things that get stuck to them throughout the course of their life. And most especially if things happen to you at an age where it becomes very subconscious. So if you were very young when stuff happened to you, that baggage can trickle through your entire life if you don't deal with it. And so it's really looking at what is that stuff. The other biggest thing you want to do with looking at previous relationship stories and the way you've had situations and the things you've told yourself about relationships and about love and about other people or whatever is looking at what are those stories rooted in. So this is so important because if you can get the root of where the stories come from, then you can actually deal with the root, right? And destroy the root versus just trying to destroy the stories where the root is still there. So then the stories are just going to keep popping up from that same root. Whereas if you can pull the root out like you would, with a weed or something, it's not going to grow back. It's not going to be there anymore because you pulled it out from the root. So what is the root of all these stories you have about relationships, about love, etc. So for me, looking at my stuff, looking at my previous stories and patterns and limiting beliefs and all of that, they were all rooted in feeling not good enough. They were always rooted in feeling unworthy of the things that I wanted. And so I had to deal with that, right? That was my root issue in my previous relationship situations, in a lot of things in my life in general. So I had to deal with that, right? I had to go inside myself and deal with the nonsense, the limiting beliefs, the stories, the things that I've been telling myself or believing about myself my entire life around worthiness, around feeling good enough. Because if I didn't do that, any relationship I would have attracted going forward would have just been more of the same, because I was the same, right? So that's the key here, is that it's not about the external things. It's about you. You are reflecting or attracting these things because of whatever you have going on inside you. And a lot of it is probably subconscious. So you don't even know that it's happening, but it is. So for me, I didn't realize I felt so unworthy in my relationships, or that I felt not good enough for the things I wanted. I didn't realize that that was what was happening until after my divorce went down, and I really started to look in hindsight at all of the stuff I had experienced and meant, oh, wow, okay, this is all happening, or all happened because I felt unworthy or not good enough. So I had to deal with that, right? And I had to actually put an end to that situation so that I could, moving forward, have something that I actually wanted that would stick. So I did that, right? I spent time really dealing with the inner stuff, doing the inner work, dealing with all of the limiting beliefs around why I didn't feel worthy, why I didn't feel good enough, where that all came from, like just dealing with all that stuff. And I really felt like I let it go and released it. Now, of course, these are certain things where like sometimes they may come up every now and then, and that's okay. It doesn't mean anything. You just have to know, like, okay, it's fine. I'm just going to deal with it and let it go. Deal with it and let it go. And not let it be something that becomes your identity, right? So that's really what a story is. It's your identity in that area. So what is your identity in relationships, in love, in that situation? And so for me, it was that I was unworthy. I was not good enough to have the kind of guy I wanted. And so I would always end up with a friend or a secondary guy, someone who was someone I was friends with and someone I was, close with and had a connection with, but really didn't have that spark, right? That I actually had with the people I truly wanted to be with, who either didn't want to be with me or who did want to be with me for a temporary period of time and then wanted to go be with someone else. So that was the story I had to change. And so I dealt with the root of it, right? Dealt with all the stuff that was coming up for that. And because of that, I was able to change my relationship story. I was able to create a new story for myself that said, I am worthy of the things that I desire. I am good enough to have the kind of guy that I want, the dream relationship where things are just easy and feel natural and flow, and that we can be really close and we can be completely 100% honest about everything, and that I can be myself fully because I don't feel judged and I don't feel not safe. Like I can be in a situation where I feel really secure in knowing that I can be who I am and that that's okay, and I'm not ever going to have an issue with this person because of it, right? Because that's, at the end of the day, what we all want. We want to be with somebody who we can really be with, who we can be our full, real selves with, and not feel judged and not have to feel insecure or like it's not good enough or anything like that. So that was the story I had to create for myself. And that's exactly what I did. I created this new story that said, of course, I get to have what I want. Of course, I'm deserving and worthy of it. Of course, I'm good enough. And by doing all of that, I manifested the most incredible person, the most incredible relationship that I've ever had. And at the beginning of that situation, it was so good and so easy and so natural that I literally had to keep reminding myself that it wasn't going to go away, right? So I had to remind myself that I did the work to change the pattern, to change the relationship story. And now I was getting the reward for that, right? I was receiving this amazing person, this amazing aligned person, aligned relationship. But I had to remind myself that I had done the work to make that happen, because otherwise I could have bought into the belief and the fear, right, that it was just going to be more of the same. And then it probably would have been. But because I had changed the story, I recognized when these little triggers were happening, and I was able to catch them and to really just make them go away and go, okay, yeah, no, like, yeah, it's fine. Like, I'm feeling really good. It's feeling really good. Like, something's got to go wrong, right? No, it's allowed to be this good. I'm allowed to have it be this good. I'm allowed to feel this good, et cetera, and whatever situation you have. So it's really looking at dealing with those things, dealing with the stuff that gets in the way, dealing with those inner stories. And then the next piece, just being really, really clear on what it is you want. Because if you don't know what you want, you can't really call it in, right? So it's hard to say, okay, this is what I want, and ask for it if you're not clear. So you have to get really clear on what you want. And this is, of course, going to be down to general and specific. So you don't want to get super specific and be like, I want a guy with blonde hair and blue eyes who's 6'5" and plays basketball and blah, blah, blah. Like, fine if you want some of that stuff, but don't get so attached to that stuff, because by getting attached to those specifics, it actually puts the block on all the other possibilities that are out there. So it like limits you. So don't do that. Go general with it, right? So in general, what do you want in another person? I want somebody who's honest. I want somebody who's caring, somebody who's thoughtful, somebody who asks me how my day went and actually means it, somebody who wants to spend time with me, somebody who, you know, shows up when they say they're going to and does what they say they're going to do. Like, what is it you want in general? That's what you want to get clear on and really focus on that stuff. Now, you can have your specifics. You can have, you know, I prefer a guy with blonde hair. I prefer a guy with blue eyes, whatever. But also be open to the fact that the universe could find someone even better who may not match those specifics, but who matches the general, right? The overall general thing that you desire to have in a relationship and in another person. So allow yourself to get really specific on the general things, right? So what are the general things? And don't worry too much about the specific traits that you think a person should have. Now, again, you can have both, write it all down, but just don't get really stuck into attachment around those things. You want to get attached to the general stuff. What do you want in general? And that's what I did. I actually made a list of all the things I wanted in general, in a person, in a relationship. Of course, I had some specifics on there as well. But I wrote everything down in general. And then I kind of forgot about it, right? I just wrote it down, didn't really think too much about it. And several months later, when I manifested my boyfriend, it was like, oh my God, he matches everything that I asked for in general, right? There was a couple of specific things he didn't exactly match, but they were things that didn't actually matter. Things like I didn't want him to have a pet because I have a dog who doesn't really like other dogs. So that was a specific thing I had written down. I want a guy that doesn't have a pet. But I ended up with a guy who has a pet, and it turned out that his dog was the perfect dog for my dog, and they're like best friends now. So, you know, it always works out perfectly when you just stay focused on what it is you desire to have. So get really, really clear on what you want in general in another person and in a relationship. And once you know that stuff, it's going to be a lot easier to have a new relationship story, because now you know what you actually want, and you're not just coming up with random things, right? So a lot of times with traditional dating, it's just like shooting fish in a barrel, right? Like you're just whoever happens to be on this app, whoever happens to be using this certain dating site, or this, who happens to know your friend who ends up, you know, introducing you to someone. Like that limits you. And there's so much more possibility out there, and you don't have to know how. You just have to know what it is you want, and the universe gets to figure out the how for you. And that's the best part, right? That's what calling it in means. Calling it in is like, it comes to me. I don't have to do anything to get it. It comes to me. That's calling it in. So if that's something you want to do, then stay tuned, because tomorrow's training is all about the Man-ifest Method, which is how to actually manifest new love in your life. And I'm really excited to share that with you guys. It's my signature process. It's the process I use to manifest my current relationship, and it's literally the best one I've ever had. And yeah, a lot of it has to do with the work that I did, but it also has to do with the specific things that we're going to talk about in this process. So stay tuned for that tomorrow. It'll be happening at 1 p.m. Eastern, right back here on my Facebook page. So that's it for today. So if you have questions about any of this, just drop them in the comments, because I will come back later and check the comments, and I'm always happy to respond to them or help you to get really clear on what it is that you want. But the whole point here is that everything in your life has a story, right? Everything in your life has a story. And whether it's a story that serves you or a story that doesn't, there's a story there. So what is it you've been telling yourself in the area of relationships? What is it you've been believing about yourself? What is it you've identified with in that area? And does that align with what you actually want? My guess is it doesn't, or you would have what you want. So now is the time to start doing the inner work, right? Dealing with what is the root cause of all the previous relationship patterns you've had, previous stories you've had in your relationships. Like, because at the end of the day, whether you want to believe this or not, it's all coming from you, right? You are the cause, and your reality is the effect. It is the effect of everything going on inside of you. So if you have beliefs, if you have stories, if you have limiting ways of thinking, if you have pattern behaviors that are not aligned with what you desire to have, then you're just going to keep getting more of the same. So you have to change those stories, change the root cause of where those stories is coming from, and then you'll get a different outcome because of that. So that is it for today. And thank you so much for being here. I will, like I said, come back to check the comments, and anyone who's watching the replay, you can feel free to comment. Be sure to join me tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern on this Facebook page for part 2 of this training, where we're talking about the Man-ifest Method, which is my signature process for manifesting dream love in your life. So stay tuned for that. And also, if you want to step into the version of yourself who has the dream love, the dream relationship, the dream person, then be sure to send me a message or check out the comments below for the link to Man-ifest, my 10-week intensive for women who are ready to call in a dream man or woman and relationship. So let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Until next time, remember, feeling good is the point and the path.